I'm dying. You're my only hope, Sarah. The pain, it's crushing me. I'm dying. You're my only hope.
The richest man in the city collapsed like a broken beggar at the door of the only woman who'd ever seen him cry, whispering the three words that would either damn or save them both. 3 months earlier, Marcus Whitfield had always believed money could buy him more time. Standing in Dr. Harrison's sterile office, surrounded by mahogany furniture that cost more than most people's homes, he learned that some things remained stubbornly outside his vast fortune's reach. The oncologist's words floated through the air like autumn leaves. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 3 months, maybe 6 if he was lucky. Lucky. The irony wasn't lost on him. Mr. Whitfield, I understand this is difficult to process, Dr. Harrison said, his voice professionally gentle. But with your resources, we can ensure you're comfortable. The best palliative care, private nursing. No. Marcus's voice cut through the clinical air like a blade. I want treatment. Experimental procedures. I don't care about the cost. The doctor's expression softened with something Marcus had rarely seen directed at him: pity. Sir, with respect, this isn't about money. The cancer has metastasized throughout your abdomen. Surgery isn't an option. Chemotherapy would only make your remaining time more difficult. Remaining time. The phrase echoed in Marcus's mind as he walked through the hospital corridors, past families clutching each other in waiting areas, past children with bright scarves covering bald heads, past lives that suddenly seemed infinitely more valuable than his own. His Bentley waited in the executive parking garage, Jerome holding the door with practiced deference. Home, sir. Marcus paused, one Italian leather shoe already inside the car. Home. His penthouse apartment overlooking the city, 30,000 square feet of marble and loneliness, filled with art he'd bought but never truly seen, books he'd purchased but never read, spaces he designed to impress but never to comfort. Yes, he whispered. Home. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. Marcus studied his reflection in the polished steel doors. 63 years old, silver hair still thick, suit still impeccable, but something had changed in his gray eyes. For the first time in decades, Marcus Whitfield looked afraid. His apartment greeted him with its usual silence. The sunset painted the floor-to-ceiling windows gold, casting long shadows across the empty rooms. He poured himself a glass of 25-year-old scotch and stood at the window, watching the city bustle below, people rushing home to families, to loved ones, to lives that mattered to someone other than themselves. What would you do if you discovered you only had months to live? Would you try to reconnect with the people you'd lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Welcome back, my incredible viewers. Your comments from the last video have been absolutely overwhelming. I can see how deeply you're all connecting with the story, and the theories you've been sharing are absolutely brilliant. Some of you are surprisingly close to the truth of what's coming next. But before we continue, don't forget to smash that like button if you're enjoying what you're seeing. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our uploads. We're building an amazing community here, and I don't want you to miss out on what's coming. And please, share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who would love this type of content. The more people we can bring into this community, the better it gets for everyone. Your engagement in the comments has been incredible, and I love reading every single one of your thoughts and theories. Keep them coming. Now, let's go in-depth into the story. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. His assistant's voice was crisp, efficient. Mr. Whitfield, the board meeting for tomorrow has been moved to 10 a.m. Also, there are 17 calls from various media outlets regarding the quarterly reports, and cancel everything, Marcus said quietly. Sir. All of it. Board meetings, interviews, appointments. Cancel everything for the next week. But sir, the Morrison acquisition will survive without me. The words carried a bitter taste. Everything would survive without him. That was the thing about building an empire on fear and respect rather than love. It could function perfectly well in his absence. After hanging up, Marcus found himself walking to a room he rarely entered, his study. Not the grand office with its intimidating desk and wall of awards, but the smaller, quieter space tucked away from the main living areas. Here, behind leather-bound books he'd never opened, sat a small wooden box. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing the contents he'd hidden from himself for 7 years: a pressed flower from their wedding bouquet, a ticket stub from their honeymoon in Paris, a small silver bracelet he'd given Elena for their first anniversary. And at the bottom, folded with care, a letter he'd written but never sent. Elena, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after what I did. I know my words come too late, and my pride has cost us everything that mattered. But I need you to know that not a day passes that I don't think about what we had, what we could have been. He'd written dozens of versions over the years, each one ending up crumpled in the trash, his pride stronger than his regret. Now, holding the letter in his failing hands, Marcus realized that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Elena Rodriguez, she'd taken back her maiden name after the divorce, lived 45 minutes away in a modest neighborhood that might as well have been another world. Marcus knew because he'd driven past her house countless times over the years, never stopping, never having the courage to knock. She'd been his secretary first, then his confidant, then his wife, and finally his greatest loss. They'd met when she was 26 and he was 43, a young woman with fire in her eyes and dreams bigger than the small accounting firm where she'd worked before joining Whitfield Industries. "You're going to change the world," he told her once, and she'd laughed, that musical sound that had made his sterile office feel like home. "No," she'd said, touching his cheek with gentle fingers. "We're going to change it together." But success had poison in its veins. The more his wealth grew, the more Marcus became convinced that Elena loved his money more than him. He'd tested her, pushed her away, accused her of things that weren't true. When she finally left, after 7 years of marriage and 2 years of his growing coldness, he'd let his pride convince him it was for the best. "She was just after your money anyway," his business partner had said at the time. "Now you can focus on what really matters." What really matters? As if anything he'd built in the 15 years since their divorce mattered more than the woman who'd known how he liked his coffee, who'd held him when nightmares about his childhood poverty woke him at 3 a.m., who'd been the only person to ever love Marcus the man instead of Marcus the millionaire. The scotch tasted like ash in his mouth. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle like fallen stars, each one representing a life, a story, connections he'd never bothered to make. 3 months. Maybe 6. Marcus set down his glass and picked up his phone, scrolling to a contact he'd never deleted but never called. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and his finger hovered over it for a long moment. What would he say? How do you call someone you destroyed and ask for forgiveness with death as your motivation? He set the phone down without calling. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. 2.5 months later. The rain fell in sheets across the city, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and broken dreams. Marcus sat in the back of his Bentley, watching the windshield wipers fight a losing battle against the storm. His body had betrayed him faster than the doctors predicted. The weight loss was dramatic now, his once powerful frame reduced to sharp angles beneath expensive suits that no longer fit. "Sir, are you certain about this address?" Jerome's eyes found his in the rearview mirror, concern etched in every line of his weathered face. In 30 years of service, he'd never questioned Marcus's destinations, but tonight felt different. The modest 2-story house sat behind a white picket fence that needed painting. A small garden struggled against the autumn chill, and warm light glowed from windows that weren't floor-to-ceiling sheets of glass but simple rectangles that somehow looked more like home than his penthouse ever had. "This is it," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse from the medication. "This is where she lives." Elena's Honda Civic sat in the narrow driveway, 7 years old, practical, a car that spoke of budgets and careful choices rather than excess. So different from the luxury vehicles he'd surrounded her with during their marriage. "Sir, perhaps we should call first." "No." Marcus struggled to sit up straighter, his breath coming in short gasps. The pain medication made everything feel distant and underwater, but his resolve remained crystal clear. She'd hang up. She has every right to. Through the rain-streaked windows, he could see movement inside the house. A shadow passed by the kitchen window, familiar even in silhouette, a shape his heart recognized before his mind could catch up. Elena, 7 years older but still carrying herself with that grace that had first captured his attention across a conference room. "I'll wait here, sir." Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. "No, Jerome. Go home to your family." "Sir, I can't leave you." "That's an order." Marcus's voice carried an echo of his old authority, but it cracked at the edges. "And Jerome? Thank you. For everything." The older man's eyes glistened. In 30 years, Marcus had never thanked him for anything. The rain hit Marcus like ice water the moment he stepped from the car, soaking through his coat within seconds. Each step toward Elena's front door felt like walking through quicksand, his legs weak, his lungs burning with effort that would have been nothing just months ago. Have you ever had to swallow your pride to ask someone for forgiveness? What gave you the courage to take that first step? Let me know in the comments. He paused at her gate, hand resting on the latch that separated him from the only person who'd ever seen him as more than his bank account. Through the living room window, he could see her clearly now, curled on a simple couch with a book in her lap, her dark hair shorter than he remembered, streaked with silver that somehow made her more beautiful. She wore a soft blue sweater and reading glasses that were new, and she looked peaceful. Content in a way she'd never looked in their marble mansion. The sight nearly broke his resolve. She'd built a life without him. A good life, by all appearances. What right did he have to disturb her peace with his dying confession? But as he watched, Elena lifted her hand to her cheek, and he saw the glint of gold on her ring finger. Not their wedding ring, she'd returned that years ago, but a simple band he didn't recognize. His heart clenched. She'd moved on. Found someone who deserved her kindness, her laughter, her love. The rational part of his mind told him to leave. To let her live in happiness without the specter of their failed marriage casting shadows over her doorstep. But the pain in his chest wasn't just from the cancer now. It was from 7 years of regret, 7 years of pride, 7 years of pretending he didn't dream about her voice calling his name. Marcus pushed open the gate. The small path to her front door stretched like a mile. His vision blurred, whether from rain or tears or medication, he couldn't tell. Each step sent lightning through his abdomen, but he pressed forward, driven by something stronger than physical agony. He raised his hand to knock, but the gesture proved too much. His knees buckled, sending him crashing against her door, his body sliding down the painted wood to land in a heap on her small covered porch. The sound echoed through the night, not a polite knock but the desperate collapse of a man who'd run out of time and options. From inside, he heard movement. Footsteps. Her voice, confused and cautious. "Hello? Is someone there?" Marcus tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. The rain drummed against the porch roof above him, and he could smell the autumn flowers she planted in clay pots beside her door. Simple marigolds and chrysanthemums, nothing like the exotic orchids his landscaper had maintained at the penthouse. The porch light flickered on, casting everything in warm yellow. He heard the deadbolt turn, then the chain lock, then the door opened cautiously. Elena stood in the doorway wearing slippers shaped like cats and the same blue sweater he'd glimpsed through the window. But it was her face that undid him. The shock, the recognition, the way her hand flew to her throat as she took in the skeletal figure huddled against her door. "Marcus." Her voice was barely audible above the rain. "Marcus, what? Oh my God." She knelt beside him without hesitation, her warm hands finding his rain-soaked face, and for a moment, 7 years collapsed into nothing. She still smelled like vanilla and kindness. Her touch still made him feel like he was worth saving. "Elena," he gasped, his voice rough and desperate. "You're my only hope." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had once looked at him with such love, filled with tears as she took in his appearance. The weight loss, the pallor, the way his expensive clothes hung on his frame like a child playing dress-up. "Are you hurt? Should I call an ambulance?" Her hands moved over him, checking for injuries, and he realized that despite everything he'd done to her, Elena's first instinct was still to care for him. "No hospitals," he whispered. "Please. I need." The words stuck in his throat, 7 years of pride warring with 3 months of mortality. Elena's neighbors' windows were beginning to glow with curious faces, drawn by the commotion. Without hesitation, she slipped her arm around his shoulders. "Can you stand? Let's get you inside." She was stronger than he remembered, or perhaps he was weaker than he wanted to admit. Together, they struggled to their feet, and Elena guided him across the threshold into the warmth of her home. The living room was everything his penthouse wasn't, cluttered with life, filled with photographs and books and a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and the scent of soup lingered in the air. It was a home, not a showcase. Elena settled him on her couch, the same one he'd seen her reading on, and disappeared into what he assumed was the kitchen. He could hear her moving around, the clink of dishes, water running. When she returned, she carried a towel and a steaming mug. "Tea," she said simply, wrapping the towel around his shoulders and pressing the warm cup into his trembling hands. "The same kind you used to drink when you couldn't sleep. Chamomile with honey." She remembered. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the fire's crackling and the rain against the windows. Elena curled in the opposite corner of the couch, studying him with eyes that held no anger, only concern and a deep, tired sadness. "How long?" she asked quietly. He knew what she meant. 3 months. Maybe less now. She closed her eyes, and a single tear traced down her cheek. "Why didn't you call? Why didn't you tell me?" What was I supposed to say? Marcus's voice cracked. That the man who accused you of being a gold digger, who let you walk away without fighting for you, was dying and wanted, what? Your pity. "My forgiveness," Elena whispered. "You wanted my forgiveness." The simple truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He set down the tea with shaking hands and looked at this woman who'd known him better than he'd known himself. "I came here to die," he said, the words scraping his throat raw. "Not tonight, but when the time comes. I don't want to die alone in that tomb of an apartment, surrounded by things that don't matter. I want..." He swallowed hard. "I want to take my last breath in the arms of the only person who ever loved me for who I was instead of what I owned." Elena's breath caught, her hand moving to her heart. "Marcus. I know I have no right to ask. I know what I did, what I said. I know you have a life now, someone who deserves you. Stop." Elena's voice was firm but gentle. She uncurled from her corner of the couch and moved closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "Just stop talking and let me look at you." Her hands cupped his face, thumbs tracing the sharp lines of his cheekbones, and Marcus realized he was crying. Tears he'd held back for 7 years finally breaking free. "You beautiful, stubborn fool," she whispered. "There's no one else. There's never been anyone else." The ring on her finger caught the firelight, and she noticed him staring at it. "It was my grandmother's," she explained softly. "I started wearing it after the divorce. People assumed it meant I was taken, and I let them. It was easier than explaining that my heart was still with a man who'd convinced himself I never loved him." The world tilted around Marcus, reality reshaping itself with her words. "You never remarried?" "How could I?" Elena's smile was sad but real. "You were my once-in-a-lifetime, Marcus. Even angry, even hurt, even convinced you hated me, you were still my once-in-a-lifetime." The fire had burned lower, casting dancing shadows across Elena's living room as Marcus struggled to process her words. "You were my once-in-a-lifetime." 7 years of assumed betrayal crumbled like sandcastles at high tide. "But you left," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain still pattering against the windows. "You walked out." Elena's hands fell from his face, and she leaned back against the couch cushions, suddenly looking older than her 50 years. "You pushed me out, Marcus. Every day, a little more. Every success, every deal, every million that got added to your net worth, it built a wall between us, brick by brick. I gave you everything. You gave me things." Her voice held no anger, only a bone-deep weariness. "Designer clothes I didn't want, jewelry that felt like shackles, cars that embarrassed me. But you stopped giving me you." Marcus closed his eyes, memories flooding back with painful clarity. The way he'd started working 16-hour days after their 3rd year of marriage. The business trips that grew longer and more frequent. The way he'd stopped asking about her day, her dreams, her thoughts on anything that wasn't related to Whitfield Industries. "I was building us a future," he said weakly. "You were building yourself a fortress." Elena stood and walked to the mantelpiece, her fingers tracing a small framed photograph. Marcus couldn't see it from the couch, but he knew what it was, their wedding picture, the one where they were both laughing at something the photographer had said, joy radiating from their faces like sunlight. "Do you remember our first apartment?" she asked, still looking at the photo. He remembered. A cramped 2-bedroom in the Lower East Side, with a radiator that clanked all night and neighbors who played music too loud. But Elena had made it beautiful with thrift store furniture and plants she'd coaxed back to life, and they'd been happy there in a way that it seemed impossible to recapture in their mansion. "You used to cook," Marcus said, the memory surfacing like a long-buried treasure. Terrible, wonderful meals that we'd eat sitting on that awful couch you'd found at a garage sale. Elena's shoulders shook with what might have been laughter or tears. I burned everything the first month. You ate it anyway, told me it was delicious. It was. Because you made it. She turned from the mantelpiece, and he could see tears glistening on her cheeks. When did we stop eating dinner together, Marcus? When did we stop talking? Really talking, not just about stock prices and board meetings and which charity gala we had to attend next. The questions hit him like physical blows because he couldn't answer them. The erosion had been so gradual, so insidious. Success had been a drug, and like any addiction, it had required increasingly larger doses to achieve the same high. More money, more power, more recognition. Until the very things that should have made their life together better had crowded out everything that actually mattered. I thought you were happy, he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. I was lonely, Marcus. Lonely in a way that hurt worse than being actually alone because you were right there, but you weren't really there. You'd look at me across the dinner table, when we actually had dinner together, and I could see you calculating, wondering if I was grateful enough for the lifestyle you were providing. Wondering if I deserved it. That's not, but he stopped himself, because it was true. Somewhere along the way, he'd started seeing Elena as another asset to be managed, another variable in the equation of his success. He'd convinced himself that her contentment was his responsibility to purchase rather than his privilege to earn. Elena moved to the window, pulling aside the simple curtain to look out at the storm. The night I finally left, do you remember what you said to me? Marcus's stomach clenched. He remembered. God, he remembered every word. I said. His voice broke. I said that you'd gotten what you wanted. That you'd married a poor man and turned him into your personal ATM. And I said. He could see her in his mind's eye, standing in their marble foyer with a single suitcase, her wedding ring on the table between them like an accusation. Her face had been calm, but her hands had been shaking. You said that you'd married a man who made you laugh, and somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten how. Elena nodded, still looking out at the rain. I waited 3 years for you to ask me to come back. 3 years for you to call and tell me you'd been wrong. That you missed me. That you wanted to try again. I wanted to. The admission scraped his throat raw. Every day. But my pride. Your pride. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That deadly stupid pride that convinced you I was the enemy instead of the person who loved you most. Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. The cancer was winning the battle against the pain medication, sending lightning bolts through his abdomen. Elena must have heard his sharp intake of breath because she turned immediately, concern replacing the distant sadness in her eyes. Are you in pain? I have some ibuprofen, or... It won't help. Marcus managed to get the words out between waves of agony. Nothing helps anymore. Elena was beside him in an instant, her hands gentle on his shoulders, guiding him to lie back against the couch cushions. She disappeared into another room and returned with a soft blanket that smelled like fabric softener and home. Better? She asked, tucking the blanket around him with the same care she might show a child. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before he could stop it. After everything I did, everything I said, why are you taking care of me? Elena settled into the chair across from him, pulling her legs up under her in a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache with more than physical pain. Because I loved you for 17 years, Marcus. 7 years of marriage and 10 years of trying to stop. That doesn't just disappear because you hurt me. But I destroyed us. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too proud and too stupid to see what I had. Yes, you did. Her honesty was gentle but unflinching. You broke my heart in ways I didn't know hearts could break. You made me question everything about myself, made me wonder if I was really just the gold digger you accused me of being. Each word was a knife, but Marcus forced himself to listen. This was what he'd come here for, wasn't it? Not just to die in her arms, but to finally hear the truth about what his accusations had cost her. But, Elena continued, and that single word held more hope than he'd felt in 7 years, I also know who you were before the money changed you. I know the man who held me when my mother died, who stayed up all night when I had food poisoning, who cried when we lost the baby. The baby. They never talked about the baby. Elena. I know the man who used to bring me coffee in bed every morning, who learned to braid my hair because I mentioned once that my father used to do it. I know the man who was terrified he wasn't good enough for me, so he tried to make himself worthy by becoming someone else entirely. Sometimes we become so focused on providing for the people we love that we forget to actually love them. Have you ever lost sight of what really matters? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes our biggest mistakes teach us the most important lessons. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, and Marcus realized that Elena understood him in ways he'd never understood himself. She'd seen through his transformation to the fear that drove it, the little boy who'd grown up poor and powerless, who'd sworn he'd never be vulnerable again. "I was so afraid of losing you," he whispered. "So I convinced myself you were trying to leave me anyway. And I was so afraid you decided I wasn't worth loving that I started believing maybe you were right." They looked at each other across the small distance between couch and chair, two people who'd spent 7 years punishing themselves for one man's inability to believe he was worthy of unconditional love. "The night you left," Marcus said slowly, "after you were gone, I went to your closet. All your clothes were still there except for one suitcase worth. I told myself it proved you were coming back for the expensive things, that you'd realized what you were giving up." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I left everything because none of it was mine. It was all costume jewelry for a role I never wanted to play. Mrs. Marcus Whitfield, the perfect trophy wife. But I was never her, was I? I was just Elena, the girl who fell in love with a man who made her laugh." "I stopped laughing too," Marcus realized aloud. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be happy. Really happy, not just satisfied or successful. Happy." "When was the last time you laughed?" Elena asked softly. Marcus thought about it, really thought about it, and the answer hit him like a physical blow. "With you. The last time I really laughed was with you." The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows, and the fire was burning down to embers. Marcus felt exhaustion pulling at him, not just the bone-deep weariness of his illness, but the emotional exhaustion of finally telling the truth. "Elena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm dying. And I'm scared." She was beside him again before he finished speaking, her hand finding his beneath the blanket. Her fingers were warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of his fear. Scared of dying, or scared of dying alone? Both. Neither. Marcus struggled to find words for feelings he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. "I'm scared that I wasted it. All of it. The time, the love, the chance to be the man you deserved." Elena's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar it made him want to weep. "Marcus, look at me." He met her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 7 years. "You weren't wasted on me," she said firmly. "Broken, maybe. Lost, definitely. But never wasted. The man I fell in love with is still in there somewhere, underneath all that pain and pride." "How can you be sure?" "Because he's the one who came here tonight. Not Marcus Whitfield the millionaire, but Marcus the man, scared and sorry and finally ready to tell the truth." Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a dam cracking under pressure. For 7 years, he'd carried the weight of his mistakes alone, convinced he was beyond redemption. But Elena's hand in his, her voice washing over him like absolution, made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for forgiveness. "What happens now?" he asked. Elena's smile was sad but real. "Now? Now we figure out how to love each other while we still can." The grandfather clock in Elena's hallway chimed midnight, its deep bronze notes echoing through the quiet house. Marcus had dozed fitfully on the couch, his breathing shallow and labored, while Elena sat vigil in the chair beside him, her hand never leaving his. When he woke, disoriented and gasping from another wave of pain, she was there with water and a cool cloth for his fevered forehead. "How long was I asleep?" he whispered. 2 hours. You kept calling my name." Her voice was gentle, but he could see the worry etched in every line of her face. "Marcus, you need proper medical care. Let me call Dr. Harrison, or we can go to the hospital." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Elena flinch. Immediately, his expression softened. "Please. No hospitals. No machines keeping me alive when I should be allowed to go. I've made my peace with dying, Elena. I want to do it right." Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, her hands trembling. This is insane. You can't just show up here after 7 years and ask me to watch you die. That's not fair, Marcus. That's not fair to either of us. I know. Marcus struggled to sit up, every movement sending fire through his abdomen. I know it's selfish. I know it's asking too much. But I have no one else, Elena. No family, no real friends. Just business associates who'll attend my funeral to network with each other afterward. That's your choice. The words exploded from Elena, with 7 years of suppressed pain behind them. You chose money over people, deals over relationships, success over love. You made yourself into an island, Marcus. You can't be surprised that you're alone on it now. Her anger was magnificent and terrible, and Marcus realized it was the first real emotion she'd allowed herself to show since finding him on her doorstep. The careful kindness, the gentle care, those were Elena trying to be strong. This raw pain was Elena being honest. You're right, he said simply. The admission seemed to deflate her anger. She sank back into her chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I know I'm right. That doesn't make this easier. What would make it easier? Elena laughed, but it was closer to a sob. Time travel. A chance to go back and shake some sense into both of us 7 years ago. A world where you never convinced yourself that I loved your money more than I loved you. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering their last fight with painful clarity. He'd come home from a business trip to find Elena crying over something. He'd never bothered to find out what, and instead of comforting her, he'd accused her of being dramatic for his benefit, of trying to manipulate him into buying her something to make up for his absence. I was so wrong about everything, he whispered. So wrong about you, about what mattered, about what love was supposed to look like. Love isn't supposed to look like anything, Elena said, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's just supposed to be present, honest, kind. It's supposed to show up, Marcus. Day after day, in big ways and small ways, it's supposed to show up. Like you showing up for me tonight. Like you should have shown up for me every day we were married. The truth of it settled between them like a stone in still water, creating ripples of recognition and regret. Marcus had spent 7 years telling himself that Elena had abandoned him, but the reality was so much more complex. He'd abandoned their marriage long before she'd walked out the door. Elena stood again, but this time she moved with purpose, disappearing into the kitchen. Marcus could hear her making phone calls, her voice low and urgent. When she returned, her face was set with determination. I called my sister. She's going to cover my classes for the rest of the week. Marcus's heart lurched. Your classes? I teach 3rd grade now, at the elementary school on Maple Street. Elena's smile was soft with genuine happiness. 8-year-olds who think I'm the most important person in the world because I help them learn to read chapter books. Of course she taught children. Of course Elena, who'd always had a gift for making people feel seen and valued, had found her way to the profession where that gift mattered most. You always wanted to teach, Marcus remembered aloud. Before you married me and I convinced you that being my wife was a full-time job. Another thing I gave up without really meaning to. Elena sat back down, closer this time, close enough that Marcus could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean, not the expensive French perfumes he'd showered her with during their marriage. But I found my way back to it. Sometimes the long way around is the only way that works. Why did you call your sister? Elena took his hand again, her fingers intertwining with his. Because if we're going to do this, if you're really going to stay here, if I'm really going to be with you at the end, then I need to do it right. No half measures, no holding back because I'm afraid of getting hurt again. Marcus felt his breath catch. Elena. I loved you completely once, Marcus. Recklessly, wholly, with everything I had. It nearly destroyed me when you threw it back in my face, but I survived. And I learned something important. I'd rather love completely and lose than never love at all. I don't deserve. Stop. Elena's voice was firm but kind. This isn't about deserving. This is about choosing. I'm choosing to love you through this, not because you've earned it or because you deserve it, but because love isn't a transaction. It's a gift. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the room felt warmer than it had all evening. Marcus looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw not the bitter ex-wife he'd imagined in his darkest moments, but the woman who'd chosen to build a life of meaning and service after he'd broken her heart. "I choose you too," he whispered. "Not because I'm dying and desperate, but because you were the best part of my life, and I was too proud and too scared to fight for you when I should have." Elena leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "We can't undo the past 7 years, Marcus. We can't get back the time we lost or the pain we caused each other." "I know. But we have now. However long that is, we have now. Is now enough?" Elena's smile was radiant through her tears. "Now is everything." She kissed him then, softly, carefully, like a prayer made flesh. It tasted like forgiveness and second chances, like coming home after a long cold journey through the wilderness of pride and regret. When they broke apart, Marcus was crying openly, 7 years of unshed tears finally finding their release. "I love you," he said, the words rusty with disuse but true as gravity. "I never stopped loving you, Elena. Not for a single day." "I know," she whispered against his cheek. "I know, my love. I know." Elena stood and held out her hand to him, and Marcus understood what she was offering. Not just forgiveness, not just comfort in his final days, but a return to the intimacy they'd lost. The chance to love each other properly, completely, for whatever time remained. "Can you make it upstairs?" she asked gently. Marcus took her hand, drawing strength from her touch. "With you? I can make it anywhere." It took them nearly 20 minutes to climb the stairs to Elena's bedroom, Marcus leaning heavily on her, stopping every few steps to catch his breath. But Elena never showed impatience, never suggested they give up. She guided him with the same tender care she'd shown earlier, her love a steady current carrying them both forward. Her bedroom was simple and warm, with a quilt her grandmother had made and photographs on the nightstand, not of lovers or new relationships, but of her students, her sister's children, the life she'd built from the ashes of their marriage. "No pictures of me," Marcus observed as Elena helped him sit on the edge of the bed. "I keep those in my heart," she said simply. "The good memories, anyway. They're safer there." Elena disappeared into the bathroom, returning with medicine and a glass of water. She'd changed into simple pajamas, cotton pants and a soft t-shirt that made her look younger, more like the woman he'd first fallen in love with. "These will help with the pain," she said, handing him pills that looked stronger than anything he'd been prescribed. "Where did you get these?" Elena's cheeks colored slightly. "My neighbor, Mrs. Chun. Her husband went through this last year. She said love shouldn't have to hurt more than it already does." The kindness of strangers, Marcus realized. Elena had built a community of people who cared about her, who wanted to help her through difficult times. She'd created the connections he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. The medicine worked quickly, dulling the sharp edges of his pain until he could breathe without gasping, think without the constant distraction of physical agony. Elena lay beside him on top of the covers, careful not to jostle him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "Tell me about your students," Marcus said quietly. "Tell me about the life you built." So Elena talked, her voice washing over him like music. She told him about Tommy, who'd struggled with reading until she discovered he learned better when he could move around. About Sarah, whose parents were going through a divorce and who'd started staying after school just to have a quiet place to do homework. About the little victories and daily joys that made up a teacher's life, so different from the corporate battles that had consumed his days. "You're happy," Marcus realized, hearing it in every word she spoke. "I am," Elena agreed. "It took me a long time to figure out what happiness looked like without you, but I found it. In small things, mostly. In children's laughter and good books and quiet Sunday mornings. I'm glad." And he meant it, despite the sharp stab of loss it brought. "I'm glad you found happiness, even if it had to be without me." Elena turned on her side to face him, her eyes serious. "But I was never complete without you, Marcus. Happy, yes. Peaceful, even. But there was always a Marcus-shaped space in my heart that nothing else could fill." The words were balm to wounds he'd carried for 7 years. Outside, the storm was finally passing, leaving behind the clean, fresh scent of washed air. Marcus felt something shifting inside him, not just the cancer eating him from within, but something deeper. The hard shell of pride and fear he'd built around his heart was finally cracking, letting in light and air and the possibility of grace. "Elena," he said softly, "I want to tell you about the man I became after you left. Not the successful businessman everyone sees, but the real man. the one who was too proud to admit he was dying of loneliness. "I'm listening." So Marcus talked through the small hours of the morning, finally telling the truth about the last 7 years. The emptiness of his success, the way every achievement felt hollow without her to share it with. The charitable foundation he'd started in her name but never told anyone about, funding teacher scholarships and literacy programs. The nights he'd driven past her house, wanting to knock but unable to face the possibility of rejection. Elena listened without judgment, her hand steady and warm on his chest, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped him dig deeper into truths he'd buried even from himself. As dawn light began to filter through the bedroom curtains, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the temporary satisfaction of a successful deal or a profitable quarter, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from being fully known and completely accepted. "Thank you," he whispered as Elena's breathing deepened with approaching sleep. "For what?" "For letting me come home." Elena's answer was soft but certain. "You never left, Marcus." "Not really. You just got lost for a while." 6 weeks later. The morning light filtered through Elena's bedroom curtains with the soft gold of early November, painting everything in warmth despite the chill outside. Marcus woke slowly, as had become his habit these past weeks, not to the harsh buzz of alarm clocks and urgent phone calls, but to the gentle sounds of Elena moving quietly around the house, preparing for another day of loving him through his dying. He could hear her in the kitchen below, humming something soft and wordless as she made their breakfast. Their breakfast. Even after 6 weeks, the simple pleasure of sharing meals with someone who loved him still took his breath away. The pain was worse now, a constant companion that the medicine could only dull, not eliminate. His body was failing in ways that would have terrified the old Marcus, the man who'd believed control was everything. But somehow, held in the circle of Elena's unwavering care, even the indignities of illness felt bearable. "Good morning, my love." Elena appeared in the doorway with a tray that held his morning medicine, a cup of chamomile tea, and a single yellow rose from her garden. She did this every morning now, brought him something beautiful to start the day, as if beauty were medicine too. "Good morning, beautiful." The endearment came easily now, naturally, the way it had in their early days together. Marcus had spent 6 weeks relearning how to love Elena properly, how to show up for someone else's happiness instead of just his own success. Elena set the tray on the nightstand and helped him sit up, her movements gentle but efficient. She'd become expert at reading his pain levels, at knowing when he needed help and when he needed to maintain whatever independence remained to him. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, settling beside him on the bed. It was their morning ritual, this check-in, but Marcus knew it went deeper than his physical condition. Elena was asking how his heart was, how his spirit was managing the approach of the inevitable. "Grateful," he said, and meant it completely. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I'm grateful." It was true. These 6 weeks had been the richest of his life, fuller than all his years of corporate success combined. They talked through their entire history together, the good and the bad, the joys and the heartbreaks, the 1,000 small moments that make up a marriage. They'd forgiven each other and themselves. They'd learned to laugh together again. Elena had been forced to take leave from her teaching position as Marcus's condition worsened, but she'd never once made him feel guilty about it. Instead, she brought her students to him through stories and photos, sharing her joy in their progress as if his illness were just another part of life to be navigated with grace. "Mrs. Chun is coming by this afternoon," Elena said, helping him sip his tea. "She wants to bring soup and check on you." Marcus smiled at the mention of their neighbor. In the past 6 weeks, he'd met more of Elena's community than he'd ever expected, the network of friends and neighbors who'd rallied around them both as word spread that Elena was caring for her dying ex-husband. Instead of judgment, they'd offered casseroles and company, practical help and emotional support. "I never knew people could be so kind to strangers," Marcus admitted. "You're not a stranger anymore," Elena said simply. "You're part of the community now. My community, which makes you theirs too." It was a foreign concept to Marcus, this idea of belonging based not on what you could provide or what you'd achieved, but simply on the fact that you were loved by someone they cared about. Elena's friends had accepted him without question because Elena loved him, and her happiness mattered to them. Jerome had visited twice, bringing reports from Whitfield Industries that Marcus barely listened to. The business was running fine without him, just as he'd always known it would. His board of directors had been surprisingly understanding about his medical leave, probably because his temporary absence didn't significantly impact their profit margins. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked as Elena helped him with his morning medication. Giving up your teaching to take care of me? Your students need you. Elena paused in organizing his pills, her expression serious. Marcus, look at me. He met her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had become his anchor in the storm of dying. I spent 7 years teaching other people's children because I couldn't have the family I wanted with you. But these past 6 weeks? Loving you, caring for you, being present for the most important journey you'll ever take? This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it means watching me die. Elena's smile was sad but steady. Especially because it means I get to love you through it. Do you know what a gift that is, Marcus? To love someone so completely that you choose to walk through the valley of death with them rather than turn away. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, another thing that had become easier in Elena's presence. The old Marcus had viewed tears as weakness, but Elena had taught him they were simply love looking for a way out. I've been thinking about the foundation, he said quietly. Over the past few weeks, as his strength had waned, Marcus had been working with his lawyers to restructure his estate. The bulk of his fortune would go to the literacy foundation he'd established in Elena's name, but he'd also set up smaller endowments for Elena's school and several other causes she cared about. What about it? I want you to run it. After I'm gone. You understand what matters in education, what teachers really need. You could make a real difference. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hand finding his beneath the blankets. Are you sure? That's a big responsibility. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Marcus squeezed her fingers as tightly as his weakening grip allowed. I spent decades building wealth, Elena. Let me spend whatever time I have left building something that matters. With you. That afternoon, as Mrs. Chen bustled around the kitchen preparing enough soup to feed an army, Marcus sat in Elena's living room surrounded by photo albums and scrapbooks Elena had brought down from the attic. She'd kept everything. Pictures from their early dating days, ticket stubs from concerts and movies, even the silly love notes he used to leave in her purse when he traveled for business. I can't believe you saved all this, Marcus said, carefully turning the pages of their wedding album with Elena curled against his side. I tried to throw it away so many times, Elena admitted. After the divorce, after the anger faded and all that was left was the hurt. But I couldn't do it. These weren't just pictures of us, they were pictures of the happiest I'd ever been. Marcus studied a photo of them dancing at their wedding reception, both of them laughing at something out of frame. They looked so young, so certain that love was enough to conquer anything. We were happy, weren't we? He said wonderingly. Before everything got complicated, we were genuinely happy. Deliriously happy, Elena agreed. Disgustingly, obviously, completely happy. My sister used to tease me about how I couldn't stop smiling whenever your name came up in conversation. And now? Elena tilted her head to look at him, her expression soft with contentment despite the sadness that shadowed everything these days. Now I'm happy in a different way. Deeper, maybe. More grateful. I know what it's like to lose this kind of love, so I don't take a single moment for granted. They spent the evening going through more albums, Marcus sharing stories Elena had never heard about his childhood, his fears, the dreams he'd abandoned in pursuit of success. Elena told him about the years after their divorce, the therapy that had helped her understand her own patterns, the slow process of learning to trust her own worth again. As night fell and Elena helped Marcus back upstairs, he felt the familiar tug of exhaustion that came earlier each day now. But tonight, instead of fighting it, he welcomed the approach of sleep. These past 6 weeks had taught him that time wasn't about quantity. It was about depth, about presence, about love given and received without reservation. Elena, he said as she settled beside him in the bed they'd learned to share again, if I don't wake up tomorrow. Sure. Elena's finger pressed gently against his lips. Don't borrow trouble from tomorrow. We have tonight. But I need you to know. I know, she said softly. I know you love me. I know you're grateful. I know you wish things had been different between us for all those years. I know you're sorry, and I know you forgive me for the things I did wrong too. I know all of it, Marcus, because we've spent 6 weeks saying everything that needed to be said. Marcus relaxed against his pillow, marveling at how completely Elena understood him. Then what's left? Living, Elena said simply. Whatever time we have left, we just keep living. Loving each other, being present for each other, finding joy in small things. That's what's left. She was right, of course. Elena was always right about the things that mattered most. Marcus closed his eyes and let himself sink into the warmth of Elena's presence beside him. The soft sound of her breathing, the way her hand found his even in sleep. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. More pain, perhaps, or maybe the final peace he was slowly learning not to fear. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged. In the arms of the woman who'd loved him at his worst and welcomed him back at his end. In a simple bedroom that felt more like home than any mansion ever had. As sleep took him, Marcus's last conscious thought was a simple one. I came home. After all these years of wandering in the wilderness of my own pride, I finally came home. 3 days later. Marcus slipped away on a Tuesday morning in November, as autumn light streamed through Elena's bedroom windows and she held his hand, whispering words of love and promises to carry his memory forward. He died as he'd lived these past 6 weeks, surrounded by grace, forgiven and forgiving, finally at peace with the man he'd been and the love he'd nearly thrown away. Elena found the letter on his nightstand afterward, written in his shaking handwriting over the course of several days. My dearest Elena, thank you for letting me come home. Thank you for showing me what love looks like when it's not afraid, when it's not trying to protect itself or prove itself or purchase anything in return. You were right about everything, about what mattered, about what I'd lost, about the man I could still choose to be even at the end. You saved me, not from dying, but from dying alone and unforgiving. The foundation is yours now, along with everything else. Use it to build the kind of world you've always believed in. One where children learn to read, where teachers are valued, where love shows up every day in small ways and big ones. But mostly, use it to remember that you were my greatest success, my truest wealth, my once in a lifetime. Everything good I ever accomplished started and ended with loving you. Until we meet again, Marcus. P.S. There's one more thing in the safety deposit box. Something I should have given you 7 years ago. The one more thing turned out to be a simple gold locket, engraved with the date of their first dance and containing a tiny photo of them laughing together at that awful little restaurant where he proposed with a ring he could barely afford. Inside the locket was a folded piece of paper, the original love letter he'd written her but been too nervous to give, full of promises he'd kept and dreams he'd forgotten until it was almost too late. Elena wore the locket to Marcus's funeral, a small service attended by the community she'd built and the few business associates who genuinely cared about the man behind the fortune. She spoke about second chances and the courage it takes to love completely, about the man who'd found his way home at the end. But the real memorial wasn't the service or the foundation, or even the generous donations to Elena's school. The real memorial was the way Elena carried forward the lessons their love had taught them both. That connection matters more than achievement, that presence is more valuable than presence, that it's never too late to choose love over pride. And sometimes, on quiet Tuesday mornings when autumn light streams through her windows, Elena can still feel Marcus beside her, grateful and at peace, finally home in the arms of the only person who'd ever loved him for exactly who he was. Their love story reminds us that it's never too late to choose connection over pride, to value presence over presence, and to remember that the richest life is one filled with authentic love. What would you risk to reconnect with someone who mattered to you? Sometimes our greatest wealth isn't what we own, but who we choose to love, and who chooses to love us back. Share your thoughts about second chances and what really matters most in life in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between pride and love? What did you learn from that choice? Thanks for watching till the end. We know you loved this story, and there are many more thrilling ones waiting for you. Just click on the video on your screen to dive into the next chapter.